Horror history.
Armin Meiwes, a German man known as the Rotenburg Cannibal, gained notoriety for killing and eating a man he met online. Meiwes had been searching for someone willing to be his victim for years and found Bernd Jürgen Brands, who agreed to be killed and eaten. They met at Meiwes' home, where Brands allowed his penis to be cut off and consumed by Meiwes. Over several months, Meiwes killed and ate Brands. Meiwes, who had a troubled childhood with his father abandoning him at 8, explained that his cannibalistic desire developed during his teenage years, influenced by the Hansel and Gretel fairy tale. Meiwes, sentenced to life in prison, has expressed regret for his actions. He even mentioned wanting to write a biography with his victim's family. Despite the shocking case, German lawyers face challenges because cannibalism itself is not illegal in Germany. Meiwes has been allowed supervised outings from prison, wearing sunglasses and a cap to protect his identity. Gerard John Schaefer Jr. was a murderer in the United States known as the Killer Cop, the Hangman, and the Butcher of Blind Creek. He worked as a sheriff's deputy in Martin County, Florida, which is why he got the nickname Killer Cop. Schaefer was convicted of killing and mutilating 2 teenage girls in Port St. Lucie, Florida, in 1972. He is suspected of being involved in up to 26 more murders. They called him the Hangman because he liked tying up women to trees with a hangman's noose around their necks before hurting and killing them. He got a life sentence for the murders in Fort Lauderdale, where he was found guilty. Even though he was suspected of around 30 killings dating back to 1969, he was only convicted for these 2. Schaefer was also a suspect in the case of a woman in Florida who was unidentified for almost 48 years. He wrote a book called Killer Fiction, which had stories about women being hurt and killed. Strangely, he didn't like being called a serial killer and even sued some true crime authors and a former FBI agent for calling him that in their books. The Bender family, also called the Bloody Benders, were serial killers in Labette County, Kansas, USA, from May 1871 to December 1872. The family included John Bender, his wife Elvira, or Almira, their son John Jr., and their daughter Kate. Strangely, only Ma and Kate were actually related by blood, but some neighbors thought John and Kate were married. The Benders became infamous for tricking travelers into coming to their inn, where they would kill them and bury their bodies on the property. The secret was revealed when a group of people searched their land and found proof of the crimes. The Benders were accused of 11 murders between 1870 and 1873, but surprisingly, they were never caught. The Dnepropetrovsk Maniacs were 2 Ukrainian serial killers, Viktor Sayenko and Igor Saprunyuk, both 19 years old, who committed a series of murders in Dnepropetrovsk in June and July 2007. They were charged with 21 murders and found guilty of intentional killing and animal cruelty. Most of their victims were women, but men and children were also harmed. Shockingly, they recorded some of their murders, and one of the videos ended up on the internet. Sayenko and Saprunyuk were given life sentences for their crimes. These crimes were described as thrill killings, involving robbery and enucleation. It was suggested that the murders were a twisted way for them to cope with their fears. Instead of seeking help, they chose a harmful path. Allan Joseph Legere, also known as the Monster of Miramichi, was a Canadian criminal who raped, set fires, and killed people. He was found guilty of murdering 5 individuals, as well as committing arson and rape. His first murder was in 1986 when he killed a store owner named John Glendenning in Newcastle, New Brunswick. For 7 months, Legere was on the loose and committed 4 more murders in places like Chatham, Newcastle, and nearby areas, which are now part of Miramichi. He killed Annie Flam on May 29, 1989, and harmed Flam's sister. Then, on October 13, he murdered sisters Linda and Donna Dorney, setting fire to their home before leaving. His last victim was Father James Smith on November 16. Legere was caught a few days later on November 24 and got a life sentence in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. In 1989, he managed to escape but was recaptured after being on the run for several months. Legere passed away in prison at the age of 67 in 2015.
Before continuing, hit that subscribe button.
David Parker Ray, also known as the Toybox Killer, was an American criminal in the 1990s. He was found guilty of kidnapping, ape, and torture, and was suspected of killing several women. Ray's actions were extremely brutal, and he had a secret torture chamber in a trailer on his property, which he called his toy box. Ray would snatch women and take them to this chamber, where he would hurt and torment them for days or even weeks. He used drugs on his victims and subjected them to awful things like electric shocks, beatings, and sexual abuse. In 1999, one of his victims managed to escape and reported him to the police, leading to Ray's arrest. He was given a sentence of 223 years in prison for what he did. His accomplices, Cindy Hendy and Roy Yancey, were also convicted for helping in his crimes. Ray died on May 28, 2002, while in custody. The Fritzl case is about Josef Fritzl, an Austrian man who did a terrible thing to his daughter, Elizabeth. He started sexual abuse Elizabeth when she was just 11 years old. When Elizabeth turned 18 in 1984, Fritzl tricked her into the basement of their home, drugged her, and locked her in a special room he made that blocked out sound. For 24 years, he kept Elizabeth there, repeatedly doing bad things to her and making her have 7 children, one of whom didn't survive. The police found out about Fritzl's crimes in 2008 when one of Elizabeth's children got very sick and needed to go to the hospital. After they arrested him, Fritzl admitted to doing all those bad things and was given a life sentence in prison without any chance of getting out. To keep Elizabeth and her children safe, they were given new names and moved to a secret place in Austria. The Fritzl case made a big impact on the laws in Austria. Because of this case, they created a new charge called enslavement in their laws to deal with people being treated like slaves. It also made people talk about whether the punishment for such terrible crimes should be stricter, like the rules they have in the United States. Richard Wershe Jr., also known as White Boy Rick, used to sell drugs and help the FBI catch bad people. In the 1980s, when he was 17, he got caught with cocaine and was arrested. But when he was just 14, the FBI asked him to be an informant, and he helped them catch some crooked police officers and gang members. In 1988, even though he helped the FBI, Wershe was given a really tough punishment, life in prison without any chance of getting out. His story was made into a movie in 2018 called White Boy Rick, with Matthew McConaughey playing a role in it. Wershe says the FBI and the Detroit police told him to be their informant and then betrayed him when he got caught with cocaine. After spending 32 years in prison, he was released in 2020. Now, he's trying to prove he's innocent, and people are talking about how strict the drug laws are in the United States, especially for young people who help the police. Wershe lives in Florida and is asking for his punishment in Michigan to be changed. Bruce McArthur, Canadian, killed 8 men in Toronto's gay village from 2010 to 2017. He used to work as Santa Claus in a mall and had his own landscaping business. McArthur got caught on January 18, 2018, and was accused of 8 first-degree murders. He admitted to all the charges on January 29, 2019, and got a life sentence without a chance to get out for 25 years. Most of his victims were immigrants from the Middle East or South Asia, and many of them were part of the LGBTQ+ community in Toronto. McArthur used his landscaping job to hide the bodies, and the police found 8 of them buried in different places connected to him. This case became the biggest investigation ever done by the Toronto Police Service, and also involved help from other police and forensic services like the Ontario Provincial Police and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. On the evening of March 31, 1922, something terrible happened on a small farm near Munich, Germany, called Hinterkaifeck. 6 people were brutally killed with a pickaxe. The victims were Andreas Gruber, 63 years old, his wife Casilia Gruber, 72, their daughter Victoria Gabriel, 35, Victoria's children Casilia, 7, and Joseph, 2, and the maid Maria Baumgartner, 44. The killer or killers were never found, making this one of Germany's most famous unsolved crimes. Neighbors got worried when they didn't see the family for a few days, and the murders were discovered on April 4, 1922. Strangely, the killer stayed on the farm for some time after the murders, taking care of the animals and eating food from the kitchen. It didn't seem like robbery was the reason for the crime. Despite interviewing many possible suspects, no one has ever been charged with the murders. The Hinterkaifeck farm was torn down the following year, and the grubbers were buried in a nearby cemetery without their heads, which were lost during World War II. The case has been looked into again several times, and in 2007, the Fürstenfeldbruck Police Academy tried to solve the Hinterkaifeck murders as a cold case.